Welcome back, Awesome Possums. Today I'd like to read to you Grace for President. It's written by Kelly DiPucchio and it's illustrated by Leanne Pham. Let's meet the author and illustrator. Kelly DiPucchio spent most of her childhood daydreaming. Unlike Grace, she never imagined that she would become president. Instead, she wanted to become a famous artist or singer. Today, she is a famous author of award-winning picture books. Kelly lives with her family in Michigan, which has 17 electoral votes. We'll learn what an electoral vote is when we read the story. Leanne Pham was born in Vietnam and grew up in the United States. She loves to travel the world. Leanne visited 5 of the 7 continents. She rode an elephant and got lost in Africa. Imagine that, getting lost in Africa. Our genre for this story is realistic fiction. What does realistic fiction mean for kids? Realistic fiction is a genre of stories where the events are made up, but they could easily happen in real life. These kinds of stories take place in familiar, everyday settings and have ordinary characters. They aim to represent real life. Unlike fantasy or fiction, realistic fiction features normal people and normal places. There are no fire-breathing dragons or adventures alongside aliens in outer space. Instead, realistic fiction focuses on conflicts and problems that any person might face in their life. For example, it might be about losing an old friend and making new ones, moving to a new and unfamiliar place, or winning a sports competition. Whatever the story's about, it shows our world and our society. Our target skill is sequence of events. Have you ever seen a really good movie? Maybe it was an action-packed superhero movie or a fantasy adventure to a far-off land. When a director creates a new film, he or she has to make sure the scenes help the movie make sense from the opening scene until the end of the movie. Likewise, as a reader, it's important for you to identify the sequence of events in a story. The sequence of events is the order of events as they occur in a story. The sequence of events in stories occur in a precise order so that it makes sense to the person reading it. Let's begin reading the story Grace for President, written by Kelly DiPucchio. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? That is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl for president ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls. Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to be president. Several students in the class laughed. Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. The snickering in the room stopped. Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Mrs. Barrington asked the class. Nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I have invited Mr. Waller's class to join our class election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school spelling bee champion. His experiments always took a blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be as easy after all, Grace thought. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat. Everyone except for Grace and Thomas got to choose a state. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 17 mean? Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. The number is determined by how many people live in the state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270? Asked Rose. That's more than half of the electoral votes, Mr. Waller said. Becoming president really wasn't going to be so easy, Grace thought. Grace came up with a campaign slogan: Make history! Vote Grace Campbell for president. Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan: Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job. Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises: a peaceful school, no bullies; a cleaner school, no littering; better hot lunches, no more fish stick tacos. Thomas made up his own list of promises: free tutoring, free soccer lessons, fish stick tacos every week. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. Each week, the teachers set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. Grace continued to campaign. At recess, she gave speeches. During lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. After school, she held rallies. Vote for Grace, the sign says. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated that the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment. After school, he played soccer. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad. She organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to approach the microphone. The Yellowhammer State of Alabama cast its 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb. Fletcher said, the last frontier state of Alaska cast its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb. Hannah called out, the Grand Canyon state of Arizona cast its 10 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. And so it went. State after state after state cast their electoral votes. The scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger State of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still unaccounted for: Wyoming. Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's homemade flag. Sam didn't say a word. "What are you waiting for?" Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The equality state of Wyoming cast its 3 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and a few boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. "Because," he said, "I thought you were the best person for the job." The following week, the students in Mrs. Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall. "My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States." This time, everyone believed she would. All right, opossums, let's turn our attention to our target skill of sequence of events. Remember, sequence of events happen in the order that they occur. I purposely put an event out of order. Our job is going to be to read the events, the 6 events, and decide which event is out of order and why. Okay? Event 1. Mrs. Barrington decides there will be a school presidential election. Then, Thomas decides to run against Grace. Next, Thomas and Grace campaign for votes. Then, Mrs. Barrington showed the class a poster of the presidents. After that, the states placed their votes. Last, Grace won the election. Which one of these events is out of order? This event right here. Mrs. Barrington showed the class a poster of the president. That happened first, boys and girls. Remember, when she showed the poster, that's when Grace looked at it and said, "Hey, why aren't there any women presidents?" That's when she decided she wanted to be president of the United States, and Mrs. Barrington then decides there will be a presidential election. So, the first event is Mrs. Barrington showed the class a poster of the presidents. Now, look down here and tell me which event is after that. Thomas runs against Grace. Grace won the election. Thomas and Grace campaign for votes. Mrs. Barrington decides there will be a school presidential election, or the states place their votes. If you said Mrs. Barrington decides there will be a school presidential election, you are absolutely correct. Now think, there's 4 events left. Which event happened next? Thomas decides to run against Grace. Grace won the election. Thomas and Grace campaigned for votes, or the states placed their votes. If you said Thomas decides to run against Grace, you're correct. Now, look at the last 3. Think, could Grace won the election go next? Could that be next? No, Grace won the election could not be next. That would be probably last. Thomas and Grace campaigned for votes. That's what happened next. After that, did Grace win the election, or did the states place their votes? What has to happen first for Grace to win the election? The states placed their votes. And last, Grace won the election. Okay, awesome possums. I hope you learned something today about electoral votes and running for president. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel. New lessons are posted weekly, and please work on your growth mindset. All things are difficult before they get easy. You have a great day, awesome possums. Come back and visit me real soon. Bye-bye.